Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from Bed Insider, and on behalf of the George Washington University College of Professional Studies and Maximus, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Securing Our Nation's Energy Position, Operational Efficiency with Programmatic AI. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod. If we don't get to them during today's conversation, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Event Resources tab on the left side of your screen. You can download today's slides. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available for download in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all polling questions and stay online for the duration of today's conversation. And now, let me turn over the reins to our moderator, John Breeden from Fed Insider. Take it away, John.
Thank you so much, Claudia. And hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm John Breeden, and today I'll be moderating what I know is going to be a lively and very interesting discussion about a really fascinating and also a pretty critical topic, because we are going to be talking about how artificial intelligence, or AI, and specifically the new idea of programmatic AI, can help to improve operations within the energy sector and other places too, but specifically within energy for sure. Now, there's a lot that AI can do within energy, especially when we look at AI not as a standalone technology, but as part of a business process where it can be leveraged towards specific uses. For example, AI might be able to streamline operations, increase productivity, contain costs, or even help protect organizations from cyber attacks from those that want to harm our critical infrastructure, of which there's a lot of those kind of attacks coming these days. We're going to talk about all of that on the show today with two extremely talented and experienced guests who really understand this area and also the pioneering approach to using AI in that way. So it's a highly technical topic, but thankfully our guests today are ready to break it all down for us. So let's meet our amazing speakers and then we can begin. First off, let me welcome Dr. Rob Roser, the CISO of the Idaho National Laboratory. Rob, it's a real honor to have you joining us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with our audience, and welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me back. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. It's always great to have you here, so thank you. We're also very fortunate to have another really well-known expert joining us today. Kynan Carver is the cybersecurity lead for Maximus Technology. Now, Kynan, I know how busy you are right now with so much going on in this exciting field, so thank you for taking the time to join us and talk with our audience today. Welcome to the show.
You bet, John. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for being here. I'd like our audience to learn just a little bit more about each of you so that they know where you're coming from when we talk about your perspectives later, and also why you two are both extremely qualified to be offering some great advice today. So, Rob, let's start with you. As I mentioned, you're the CISO of the Idaho National Laboratory. That is extremely impressive, and it also sounds like a pretty fascinating job. How long have you been doing that? And can you share with our audience today a little bit about your impressive history in technology and also, of course, government service?
Certainly. So yes, as you mentioned, I am currently the CISO at the lab. I came to Idaho National Laboratory about 6 years ago. I joined as their chief data officer, a position I still hold. Shortly after I joined, the CISO departed, and so I was asked to fill in an acting capacity. I'm not exactly the typical CISO or have the typical CISO background, but I've never left the role, so here I am. In terms of my background, I'm trained as a particle physicist and spent 25 plus years at Fermi National Laboratory as a practicing physicist. So I've been involved in technology and in the federal space for quite a long time. At Fermilab, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to contribute to essentially understanding how the universe works. We were able to find first evidence for the Higgs boson and the top quark back in the day, and so now I transitioned. It's not as odd as you think that a CISO would be a particle physicist. The roles are actually quite similar. In both roles, you deploy sensors, you collect data, and you're trying to find tiny signals from a big background. So it's a fun job.
Yeah, no, excellent. I don't know, Rob. I don't think I've ever heard another CISO mention a particle physicist in their background. So that's pretty exciting, if you ask me. And one more thing I want to ask you while I have you, I know that the Idaho National Laboratory, you guys are always working on some really fascinating projects. You mentioned kind of the particles and things like that. What kind of major initiatives or projects is the laboratory focused on right now?
Yeah, so Idaho National Lab is a multi-purpose laboratory, meaning we do a number of different research activities. The two principal ones that we're probably best well known for is studying or researching nuclear energy, small modular nuclear reactors, how to make low enriched nuclear fuels, and how to do nuclear more safely, if you will. And the other piece is protecting the nation's critical infrastructure. Given the recent thirst for AI, nuclear energy is more important than ever because it's the only way we can do that. So
Yeah, no, excellent. I have a lot of great questions for you, Rob. So thank you again for joining us. And Kynan, thank you also for being here. Now, I know how much of an expert you are in this field, and the audience is going to get a lot out of your insights today. To start things off, could you maybe tell us a little bit about your history working in technology and some of the things that you do today as the cybersecurity lead for Maximus Technology?
Thank you for the opportunity. So joined Maximus 3 years ago. Prior to that, I spent roughly about 6 years in the Air National Guard as a combat controller overseas in various deployments, which kind of led me to the road of the federal government, where I found myself going in and out of the government, in fact, both as a civilian and as a contractor, in both operations capacity and in programmatic capacity as well. So I found myself really in Maximus kind of on the other side from those, again, federal employment perspective to kind of serve the government in a different capacity. What I'm doing at Maximus today is building out the cybersecurity practice and looking for intersection points where industry can meet the federal government in the way that we approach cybersecurity, and looking for those cutting edge solutions that can really advance our operational status. It's good to be here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned a lot of the public sector work that you're doing. You've been there for 3 years with Maximus Technology? I was just curious, are there any projects that you've been able to work on so far that you're really kind of proud to be a part of there in the public sector?
Oh, absolutely. I've worked in the DoD for, as indicated, for a long time. In particular, I enjoyed working with cyber operations centers. I'm currently supporting those as a as-need basis. Also, I provide expert counsel to like the DCO office and the CIO's office for the DoD. Not to mention, we do have a contract with Nettle, so in supporting them from a cyber operations as well. So heavily involved in all those, and again, great customers, and looking forward to the future of cybersecurity in that space.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you both for talking about your impressive histories. It's clear that we have the right people with us today to talk about this fascinating topic. Now, artificial intelligence, or AI, as we will call it from now on, can really help out government and agencies in a lot of ways. We've had quite a few shows on this, but this is the first time I believe that we've looked at AI use for energy agencies and within the energy sector, which Rob was kind of hinting at is something that's really going to be really helpful there. It's also the first time, though, that we've really focused on this concept of programmatic AI. And as such, I'd like to first try and level set things with our audience today regarding the situation, and make sure that some of the terms we're talking about and discussing, everybody kind of understands what we're doing before we really dive in. So kind of in this level setting part of the show, maybe I can start with you if that's okay. Now, again, programmatic AI, it's something I had to kind of look up, but as I understand it, it's both a concept and kind of a practical way of looking at and deploying AI. Could you maybe explain for our audience what is meant when we say programmatic AI, and then also explain why it is especially helpful in places like within the energy sector versus just kind of a general AI kind of deployment?
Yeah, thanks. So programmatic AI is kind of an emerging point, right? As you indicated, John, it's really the combination of, looking at deploying and developing heavily coded systems, structured process, and focusing on integrations. All those words meaning like you're taking AI and you're including it into the workflow process, right? So in particular, in the energy sector, where you're looking at, programmatic AI is, we're focusing on how AI is really going to augment or answer some of the more challenging questions in this energy sector. For example, on censoring, right? Like we'll get to this later on, but with systems that are inherently legacy, you're able to essentially use some of AI to help bridge that gap. And create a new workflow dynamic that allows us to bring that sensor information into the system so we can start monitoring it from a cybersecurity perspective, of course.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I suppose in the energy sector, you've got a lot of sensors, obviously, but having a human like try to look at like thousands and thousands of readings every second is not really going to be helpful.
Agreed. There is a ton of data within the energy sector that, reactors and such, and Rob will probably address this in a few, but all that data is incredibly hard to parse through by just analysts alone. And so having AI, again, part of that augmentation of the workforce will allow you to look at driving real insights into that data at scale and at volume. Also, because you're building that AI model, you can start triggering on things that not necessarily are apparent to an analyst, right? You can start making logical leaps, obviously with the analyst in the loop to validate it, but that is really where we start getting some of the power of AI and programmatic AI in particular in the energy sector.
Yeah, no, excellent. I have a lot of great questions for you along that in just a bit. So, Rob, the other thing that we're going to be talking about today, of course, is energy systems and organizations within that quite a lot. Could you maybe explain for the audience why and how the energy sector and various organizations within it are maybe a little bit different than other organizations, especially maybe other federal agencies, but also other just organizations in general? And what kind of special challenges or concerns might they have, which might make something like effective AI uses especially helpful?
Yeah, I'm so happy to. So the energy sector is quite complicated, right? Out there are sophisticated energy providers that have invested in modern industrial controls designed with cybersecurity in mind. And then there are these mom and pop utilities out in rural America that are running systems that are perhaps decades old. And then you have everything in between. So your approach for how you protect those and how you monitor things is really different depending on where they sit each of on the technology spectrum and what are the risks that they have to protect. So ultimately the challenge comes down to given there's a lack of investments and not enough people at these utilities, we're going to need to rely on things like AI to sort of fill in the gaps with where people don't exist or to augment the limited staff. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, sort of the arm of cyber in the federal government, has certainly recognized this gap, and they've been for a while now deploying sensors and monitoring them in a remote fashion to give us more visibility that we can now start to connect some of these dots together through these AI technologies.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you bring up an interesting point that I didn't even realize within the energy sector. I assume that all of the energy sector was run by like these mega corporations, but you say there's like a lot of little smaller areas like within states or even regions that are probably don't have billion-dollar IT shops to run things.
Yeah, I mean, they may have one IT person that's responsible for both the IT as well as the cyber.
Wow, that's crazy. Definitely a challenge. Thank you, Rob, for pointing that out. It makes a lot of sense. I also want to briefly touch on the threat landscape, especially since we're going to be talking a lot about using AI to help with cybersecurity. And Rob, let me ask you about the threat landscape, since I know you've been a CISO for a while now, and you've also worked within cybersecurity. What are the threats that you're seeing today compared with, like, say, a couple years ago when you started, and the kinds of things that agencies were facing just maybe a few years ago that sort of makes the need for something like AI so prevalent these days?
Yeah, I mean, the threat landscape has changed quite a bit and continues to change dramatically. The biggest change, at least in my opinion, is that nation states are starting to get all in terms of being an effective adversary in ways that they weren't just even a few years ago. Many of these nation states are well-funded, well-skilled, and patient, and so they have the capability of getting in. Also, the goals have changed, right? The goals now are to get at intellectual property, to gain some sort of competitive advantage, to be prepared to fight a cyber war should a war break out. So they're not really, it's not really a game of ransomware and collecting money, much as it is a game of trying to take their countries forward in either technology or whatnot. The second are the tools are very different, and they're much more sophisticated today than they were. And people are starting to use AI to start to merge tools together to make yet a super tool, if you will. And then third, I would say is that there's so much PII out there on people that it's easy for these adversaries with well-tuned AI engines to craft spear phishing campaigns, leveraging those kinds of PII that is available to spoof an individual and talk help desks into granting them access in ways that they really shouldn't. If you remember MGM of 2 years ago or so, that's exactly how they were crippled by a help desk employee that was just trying to be too helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting hearing you say, and a little scary actually, hear you say, so we have nation states that are sort of entering the fray. And then you also have these AIs that are working against us. I mean, here we are doing this this webinar talking about ways that we can use AI in defense. I wonder if the bad guys are out there somewhere doing their own webinar about ways that they can improve their attacks. So definitely something to think about. Kind of another area that I want to bring up that's kind of really important in government and also in the energy sector, of course, is modernization, which I suppose, if you think about it, is sort of a subset of security too. How important is the modernization program at agencies, and what kinds of equipment and processes should be constantly modernized? And are there good ways to kind of add AI and AI-based applications as part of a modernization program?
Yeah, modernization is essential, right? As we're kind of alluding to, right, with the evolution of AI, just our ability to incorporate that into the federal government, into our everyday lives, is just becoming increasingly more obvious. And a desire and, quite frankly, a need, as Rob indicated. Threat intelligence, I'm gonna go back for a minute, but like threat intelligence is accessible, it used to be accessible by just companies. Now it's accessible by individual users, right? And we're seeing an uptick in the individual, right? Nation state aside, but we're seeing the accessibility of the individual user to craft very clever, very capable exploits, deep phishing exercises, et cetera. But that's the reason why we have to modernize. That's why it's essential. And part of that is the things you should be looking at is, back to the programmatic AI, is like, how do we incorporate AI into our workflow? We've always holistically looked at IT infrastructure, software, et cetera, et cetera. But what we need to start getting at with AI is to that copious amount of data that we have generated over the course of decades, right? And how can we start utilizing that in a way that's more impactful to our modernization efforts in the future? And some of the tools you can use, again, there's a platform out there. I would encourage you guys to, again, look at the various AI models, look at exactly what you're trying to do from the AI model. And I think that's essential. Like you need to understand fundamentally, don't do AI for just AI's sake. You need to have an intent to modernize. And what is that end state you're looking to achieve? And then look at what AI model or language or process, et cetera, that best gets you that outcome in a way that's cost efficient, effective, and ultimately, in my mind, secure. And with that comes, again, security. If you're, again, looking into those models and doing your research, I think through modernization, you will start seeing a next level of security. And then on the counter, as the adversary continues to exploit these large language models and these processes, you'll see advanced, attack vectors. And that's why again, just to double tap that, you have to think about modernization. You have to look at this as a way to succeed in the future.
No, I think that's great advice, Kynan. I mean, it's kind of the old adage, measure twice, cut once. I mean, don't just do AI because you want to get AI in your system, but have a real plan, even if that plan takes a while to put together and kind of delays your AI deployment. That's right. Probably a better way to approach it.
Yeah, in training data, right? Data has to be, if you're going to use AI, data has to be clean. You have to go through there and you have to be judicious in what information you're going to include into that AI model. And I'd argue that you can use your base level AI models, but really your AI agents is really you're going to start looking at incorporating your data and clean data, right? Like bad data in will give you bad results in the past, right? We can all know that from other large language models where we get hallucinations, et cetera. That being said, like clean data is essential. And look for biases, right? Like the information you put in tends to have natural biases in there. So look to, again, back to measure twice, cut once. Like look at what you're trying to achieve and then look at the information you're putting in and how is that going to, again, impact the results that you get out of that model.
Yeah, no, great. Giving us a lot to think about. Appreciate that. Thank you both for these really well detailed responses for the level setting part of our show today. I mean, I think that was really interesting and brings up a lot of questions for our next couple sections. So thank you all for level setting that. I'm sure the audience appreciates it as well. And speaking of our amazing audience today, I would like to invite all of you watching the show to please submit any questions you might have to our amazing guests today. I mean, as you can see, both of our guests are really at the top of their fields when it comes to AI and cybersecurity issues, especially within energy. So if you have a specific question about that, now would be a great time to get that answered. We will try to get to some of the questions live on the show today, but if there's not enough time, we are going to round them all up and give them to our speakers afterwards. So in either case, please keep those questions streaming in. I see some of you already are, which is great. I'll try to get to some of those in just a bit. But in the meantime, we look forward to hearing from everybody else as well. So that's great. Okay, so let's move on to some of the challenges of using AI with various tasks in energy and other agencies, what it can do, what we want it to do, and some of the challenges that need to be overcome in order for us to get there. So, Rob, I know that you've really studied this issue. In terms of using AI to assist with things like cybersecurity, I mean, it sounds from the previous section that that's going to be an area that is going to be especially helpful in energy, especially with the threat landscape that you kind of described. So in terms of using AI for cybersecurity, where do you see the most promise in that? And what do you think are good goals for AI use in the future? And I mean, what do you hope to be able to achieve with AI in terms of protecting yourself and your agency?
Yeah, let's see how good my crystal ball is on that. So here's what we know, right, is that most cyber tools on the market today have built in some form of AI capability. So even if a team isn't trying to explicitly build some own AI or leverage it, they probably already have some AI capability in their playing defense on their behalf. How good these AI are in these different systems is difficult to tell, but and it's also, how much of it is marketing. I do think AI holds a tremendous amount of promise for cyber teams, as Kynan said, right? It is phenomenal for distilling large volumes of data that we have to sift through regularly. So using it to do that and finding sort of the outliers, if you will, is terrific. We can use it to monitor the sentiment of our organizations and potentially provide an early warning of an insider threat. Feed emails and chats into it and see what measure the pulse, if you will, of an organization. Might give you a heads up. It can be the basis of response automations and free up the SOC to focus on other hard problems. And you can train it on your playbooks or whatnot and help responders be more effective and be able to come up to speed much quicker. I do have some doubts, though, in that can cyber teams ever catch up to the sophistication that the adversaries currently have? Right, the adversaries are now able to launch attacks at scale. Right, the phishing emails that used to be very easy to identify with bad grammar and misspellings and stuff are no longer. Right, these adversaries can run their models very hot because they don't care if it takes a couple thousand launches of attacks before they gain access. And cyber teams, we do care, right? We can't run our models really hot to play defense because we can't afford thousands and thousands of false positives from these hallucinations. So given that they have this competitive advantage, how do we try to recover? And I don't think, at least I haven't thought that through all the way. I'd love to hear what Kynan thinks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll give Kynan a chance to respond to that right now. I mean, Kynan, it's always interesting to listen to Rob talk about cybersecurity, sometimes a little scary. I mean, he just was mentioning about he has this desire to use AI to maybe get ahead of the attackers, especially those that are now using AI to increase their attacks and their effectiveness. I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges in terms of helping defenders to get ahead of using AI? And is it possible? Can we help Rob out here?
That's a great question, right? So it is possible, right? So the good news is AI can help. However, I mean, there's a lot of caveats to this particular statement, right? Like Rob had it right. Like you have to fundamentally understand what does your attack surface look like, right? Like in particular, you know, the energy sector, an infrastructure project or an infrastructure itself, like you got to understand where are the vectors where an attacker can, you know, leverage an attack. And I think AI can answer some of that, right? We can look at information within your router or your IP packets, your networks, your logging systems, and your SOAR, your SIM, et cetera. And you can look for behavioral patterns, right? One, you can use AI to kind of map out what is your normal, you know, network operations look like? What is your normal behavior of your system, right? Because a system is similar to a person in the sense that it behaves a certain way on a daily basis. And once you had that codified, right, using certain AI tools, then you can start looking for the abnormalities in the situation. In other words, like, for example, like this particular sensor just went off. Like, why did it do that? Normally it never does this. So let's do that. That's part of what, you know, Rob talked about from a SOAR platform. It allows the analyst to look at real results, not necessarily get alert fatigue, which is currently, you know, pandemic in our environment here, right? Like there's a lot of information, again, back to the data, there's a lot of that information out there that the cybersecurity analyst has to look at on a daily basis. And anything that allows us to get to the substance risk of the situation, it just makes us faster, you know, allows us to respond quicker. That being said, AI will play a part in that response, right? You can set up those playbooks using the AI to enact changes in real time to counter what could be an AI type attack, right, in real time. So there's a lot of goodness out there. I say some of the challenges you're going to look at the AI itself, again, is part of that novel attack. Part of it is the black box. You have to look at these large language models and understand, if you can, what is inside them, right? Like you don't, back to what Rob said, you don't necessarily need to trust it because it just was released by a vendor, though they've done their research. But more importantly, you need to fundamentally understand what is trying to achieve as well. And you can kind of dispel that black box, like what is in that large language model to make these decisions. I think that's essential, right? Like, because you don't want to do things in a vacuum, right? The more that you have information, the more that you can make those informed decisions, the more that you can counteract these sophisticated attacks and what will be more sophisticated attacks. And I think it's the next level of this. And we all know this, like our users, us as users of the system, are the primary attack vectors for a lot of these malware attacks. So with that, you know, we have to educate our users not only on how to use the AI system within their environment, but more importantly, I think, is how do they use AI in their life? Because if we can distill, we'll call it AI hygiene in their personal life, that will absolutely transcend into, you know, your work life, because now you understand what it is you're trying to defend against.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. And talking about using AI for security, we had an audience question that I thought was really good. On some other shows, we've talked about how you can actually open yourself up to vulnerabilities and things by using AI. Is it possible then, Kynan, for, and this is kind of what the audience question was getting at, is it possible to embrace AI in these new roles without opening yourself up to new attacks and new vulnerabilities?
Oh, of course. I think, again, history has allowed us to look at the past and kind of make these decisions, right? We need to look, if we're going to do AI, you're going to deploy these large language models or these new software packages that includes an AI agent in them. You need to do that not in production. You need to do that in a test environment, right? Prove out, understand, again, back to that black box problem, like understand fundamentally what it's trying to solve, what you want it to solve. And once that is answered in a satisfactory way, then you can lift it into production and use it in the environment. And then use that, to me, you kind of, it's really a three-part stage. One, you do the testing in the environment, like just totally R&D dev, like understand what it is. Two, you roll it up into a production-like test environment so you can train it on what it's supposed to see. And then again, bring it into production. And now in production, now you have a better understanding of what it's trying to accomplish. And now the training data, it can get smarter, if you will. The training data will allow it to be smart going in, and the new information it receives in production will just make it that much more impactful. So the answer is yes, we can put it in there, but just be responsible. And I think that's generally what a lot of people are looking at, is how do we responsibly deploy AI where it doesn't increase our attack surface, but mitigates our attack surface.
Yeah, no, great answer. Thank you, Kynan. And thank you for answering the audience member's question. And thank you to the audience member for the question. That was great. All of this is so interesting. I'm learning so much today, and everything that you guys are saying makes so much sense. Let's talk some more about some of the challenges of AI for agencies. Now, Rob, when looking at or considering AI use, either for cybersecurity or maybe just to help with other business processes, as you mentioned previously, what are some of the key challenges that you see that people need to consider?
Yeah, there are a couple really from where I sit. No, first and foremost is hallucinations and not recognizing that the model is hallucinating. So that's a big one. The next one kind of just sort of hit on is basically inadvertent data sharing, if you will, and that may have been the audience person's question. And then third is unintended and unrecognized bias in the model. If you're building a model and you're as Kynan said, it's impossible to not build in bias. But if you don't understand the bias you built in, then you may be taking actions that you didn't intend to because of that. So how do you deal with that, right? So if you're running a large language model like a DeepSeek or ChatGPT in their cloud instance, you're at risk because the data that you enter there will turn into training data for their future models, and so you have to be very careful about how you do that. Don't just dump resumes or offer letters into that and have them improve it, because now you're exposing people's PII to that. So one way to deal with that, number one, is training, to make people aware of what is required to be responsible or what is responsible use for AI, right? Protecting or preventing data sharing, though, is not easy. We have a DLP capability, which helps, right? That will prevent certain files that are tagged appropriately to be shared with something, but it doesn't stop for cutting and pasting. There are some now proxy solutions. I haven't played with them yet, but I'm intrigued by them, that basically will offer a front end to services like Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT that sort of offers an additional filter or layer of security. But again, even that's not perfect. So you have to, again, you have to be mindful of how you use these things so that you're using it to their fullest advantage, but not letting your guard open, if you will.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's interesting you mentioned the training, and I want to ask you this, Rob, about the human aspect of this. I mean, on shows like this, it's neat to talk about the technology, but ultimately, I guess the AI is going to be directed and used by humans. So, I mean, how important is it to have a training component so that your workforce understands the dangers of AI, how to use AI, and what are some of the things that you want to make sure that the people who are going to be using the AI know about and are part of that critical training?
Yeah, there's really two aspects. One is the ethics of AI. So we have some ethics training that talk about what is appropriate use and what isn't. And then maybe teaching people a little bit about how these models actually work so that they understand the potential consequences of their actions. I mean, if you go back, I don't know, let's say 12 to 18 months ago, when sort of ChatGPT 3.0 first came out and was starting to be broadly used, there's a number of companies' intellectual property now in that dating set because they employees weren't aware or cognizant of the risk they were taking by putting that in there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess that gets back to what Kynan was saying about the kind of the black box mentality. It's good to train people that it is a black box in a sense, but you can kind of figure out what it does and how it acts and what the dangers of interacting with that is. So makes sense. Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate that. Kynan, I'm loving listening to Rob and you talk about this. I'd like to get your thoughts as well about the challenges of implementing AI in government and also especially within energy. I mean, obviously, people are seeing a lot of potential advantages when it comes to AI, but as Rob was saying, they can do things that maybe accidentally put their PII or their critical information in there, which is something you don't want to see in government. So, from your perspective, what are some of the key challenges that kind of stand in the way of these like really good ideas for AI implementations?
I think it comes down to policy, right? Like if your agency or your company hasn't looked at creating AI policies, then that's step one, right? You need to get out what is the guidance to the employee or the company on how to responsibly use these tools and resources. I think another challenge, again, I want to address the black box. We kind of talked about that, but again, it's like, what are we trying to solve, right? Like if we're trying to get at, for example, if we're trying to enhance our citizen services, then AI can absolutely help you with that, right? We can create a chatbot. We've seen them now, right? Like we can create a chatbot that's more natural, right? That can interface with the government on behalf of the citizen in reverse, right? For the citizen on behalf of with the government, where it's effective and meaningful, right? Where you're getting the information at real time, opposed to sending emails, making phone calls, standing in line. Now you're able to ask this chatbot in your language, not the government's language, these questions and get these answers, right? And the challenge is, how do we embrace that technology in a way that, again, is meaningful, that purposeful, that's responsible, and ultimately in the area of Doge, like, cost effective, right? Because AI, if you're trying to build your AI large language model, that is hugely expensive, right? And so how do we use the existing model sets and put AI agents on them, or build AI agents to interpret that, right? So to me, it's all that's in play. All those are challenges that, when looking to do this kind of work, you need to look at and address prior to doing it.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned the chatbots. It's interesting that many, like a year and a half ago, when we started doing shows about AI, and the chatbots were sort of coming out, and we did some audience surveys, and people hated interacting with the chatbots because they were bad. Sometimes they gave you bad information, and sometimes they were just a bad personal experience where it was like kind of like being on hold. But these days they seem to be getting better. So I mean, part of that, I guess, is it's important to look at the past and improve. Like would you say that like a chat bot is now kind of a fixed technology where you can kind of deploy that perfectly, or at least much better without a lot of the risks? I mean, I noticed a lot of the people now, when you ask them about interacting with chatbots, they're a lot more favorable to it.
Again, as part of the technology, what are you training the data on? What do you expect your results to be, right? At Maximus, we looked at this, right? And we came up with a total user experience management process that kind of addresses this. That being said, essentially, you can't just deploy a chatbot in the hope that somehow it's going to be, the top thing, right? Or the thing that answers your question in a very natural way. There's a lot of processing you have to go in. There's a lot of training you have to go in there. And there's a lot of, honestly, user testing to make sure that it is answering the question the way that best resonates with the individual user. So I wouldn't say it's just like go download a chatbot and it's going to work right off the shelf. I'm sure there's things like that, but there's, like any piece of software, right? There's a time in which you deploy it, and it becomes more useful over the course of time because you're now fully exploiting or fully utilizing its capabilities, and you're maturing it. Right back to the modernization question, you're modernizing the way that chatbot is being used and how it's answering.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate that. So this has been really interesting. You both outlined a lot of really great challenges, a lot to think about for AI in different roles, including a few that I think people probably didn't initially consider. So that's great. With some of those challenges in mind now, let's move into the solutions and advice part of the show to really help our audience ease into AI-assisted cybersecurity and other uses as well, and be able to do it in a safe way. So, Rob, let's start with you here in the solutions section, which, let me tell you, is always an audience favorite. What are some of the ways that you're using AI right now to assist with cybersecurity and other tasks? Do you have any kind of success stories that you can maybe share?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to make one final point on the chatbot thing. At least from being just a user of these sort of things, I think some companies have gone in too quickly. The chatbot is now the company's face to its customer. And you want to make sure think that through all the way. Is that really the face you want to present to your customers? Now, getting back to your question, I would say overall, I think security teams are still in the learning phase of how to fully leverage this technology that we're talking about. Obviously, as we talked earlier, there's a lot of AI already baked into products that we're running. I talked a little earlier about using AI and running your emails or Teams chats through it and do a sentiment analysis to give you an understanding of what the tension of the lab is I think it's probably very important given the tension in federal space right now across all of government with what's going on with this administration. You can bin that sentiment analysis by subsets, sub-agencies, subdivisions, however fine you want to do it to keep an eye on things. We're starting to put our PCAP traffic through an AI engine to start looking for anomalies. And I think we haven't done this, but I'm sure you could set it up to basically look and identify phishing emails before they get to your end user, given most phishing emails have common characteristics of a spear phish. They have, they want an action. There's some immediacy to clicking that link or doing it that probably could be taken advantage. I assume at some point Microsoft will do this, but I don't think they're doing it yet.
Yeah, this is the CIO. I need $1 million wired to me immediately. Absolutely. So Kynan, it sounds like Rob is starting to use AI in a really interesting ways. He talked about sort of using it as to kind of measure sentiment, to sort of look for insider threats, something that I hadn't considered was sort of a possibility. What are some areas that you see AI being used successfully in defense? And maybe you have some examples from some of your customers. I know you get to see kind of a big overview of what's going on in this area.
Yeah, so AI is going to play a part in enhancing threat detection, your automated threat response, security orchestration, automation. I'm going to go through a list. So, it just goes on, right? Phishing detection, which Rob pointed out, amazingly. All this, right? So I think it's curious, right? We're starting to see, for example, you saw that Palo Alto bought, IBM's product for I forget what the exact one is, but anyway, Cisco did the same thing with Splunk, right? And so you're seeing these hardware vendors get into these SOAR platforms, right? And really start putting AI into those SOAR platforms to get at some of these challenges, right? As we discussed earlier, to remediate some of the alert fatigue, to actually look at what is the critical action we need to take on this alert or this particular exploit. So that being said, I do want to answer one of the audience's questions about how is AI going to impact zero trust architecture. Absolutely. So to me, if you're looking at the federal government standpoint, right, there's two different, essentially similar but slightly different architectures for zero trust early standards, right? For the DoD, it's very comprehensive. It has like 192 different areas that you have to go after. CISA has another one, but they're all broken down into individual pillars. And so AI at all those pillars are going to be impactful, right? In particular, where I find the federal government most stymied, and there's a need to be stymied, right, is the data leader, right? The data pillar, right? And so AI, back to that, the voluminous of information that's in the system, like how do we use AI to properly tag information, to classify information, and then make intelligence decisions based upon access control on the attributes of that document or that file. And that's where AI is going to help you do that, right? It's going to help you classify information. Again, this is not an immediate action. This is something that's going to happen over time. But once you get there, right, once you're able to then classify your systems, classify your information, tag your information, and get it to the attribute level, then it becomes something the next level, right? Now you can look at a document and say, I want to parse this document at the individual paragraph level, right? Because I'm now key to these words, and on this AI, device or this AI model, we're keying into those keywords, and when I send that off to the Active Directory to say, is it a decision to be made here? Can they see this portion of this document, right? Or do they even get the document at all? Those are just some of the examples, right? We can get into networking, as Rob indicated, like the more that you put your PCAP information into the network, the more that it understands fundamentally what is your normal behavior of this network and what is abnormal. And that way the analysts can look at that abnormal behavior and then really focus in on that, opposed to what we've traditionally done on the analyst side, look at SolarWinds or Wireshark and really get into the PCAP information and we really try to deep dive into that to further understand it. So there's a lot of benefits that AI will bring. But again, I caution a lot of people, just know what you're trying to accomplish, do it responsibly, and do it in a way that doesn't put you in risk.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for addressing the audience question about zero trust. I was going to direct that to you. I was glad you saw that. So that's really perfect. I also wanted to ask you, Kynan, why I have you here in this section about the use of AI specific to the energy sector, like what we're talking about today. One of the things we see a lot in energy, for example, is operational technology, which is sometimes just called OT. And OT can compromise a lot of different kinds of systems, but they're generally much more manually driven and not closely networked like IT systems. And they seem to be in the energy sector much more than anywhere else, places like plant control systems and things like that. How can places like that, like in the energy sector that have a lot of OT, also benefit from the use of AI? I mean, it would seem like they're kind of different worlds, but have you seen examples where AI can work and assist with OT cybersecurity?
I personally not seen the examples, but here's how it's going to work, right? As you rightly pointed out, OT in these infrastructures, in these complex systems like watering systems or electrical systems, like these individual sensors could have, like Rob pointed out, could be 10 years old, right? The language in which they use to program that sensor is not even necessarily relevant to today. So I would say using AI to understand how to interpret those results in a meaningful way is one way that AI is going to get at that problem, right? And one way you're going to take these OT systems that are disconnected, offline, and bring them into a way, into your essentially your SIEM platform or your SIEM platform, and then monitor those from a cybersecurity, because that's ultimately where, you know, from a cybersecurity perspective, where OT is really our biggest concern is these systems are heavily isolated, right? Like if we look at a water system, like it may be only on a very internal network, right? A very isolated network. And as soon as you breach into that network and you join that to the overall infrastructure, that then exposes that 10-year-old information plus to that infrastructure. And that becomes another vector point for an attack. So that being said, you can look at AI, right? Back to that PCAP data, back to understanding what that sensor is putting out, look for that behavioral information, and then make the informed decision. Is this sensor acting the way it's supposed to? If not, do we need to remediate it now? I.e., do we need to go send somebody to go fix that sensor or check it out? Or do we simply need to turn it off until we can investigate it?
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. And Rob, I know you and I have talked about OT systems before on other shows, so I want to ask you. I mean, obviously, kind of what Kynan was saying, and I know you know this, but these OT systems, they don't have the computing capacity or the controls to support anything even close to AI natively. I mean, I've seen some industrial control centers. They're like levers and buttons and things like that kind of aren't really computing. So how can AI be deployed to help protect systems like that? And have you seen any examples where we've been able to kind of do that successfully? I know that's a big deal in the energy sector.
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't. I mean, well, it's starting. Native AI, I would say, native isn't for everybody, right? To do native AI, you need people that have the skills to do it, that can build applications out of it. You also need data, as Kynan said, that is clean, that you can use to train it on. If you have the skills and ability to do it, then you're much better off, because now you're building a defense package that is specific for your threat landscape and the technologies that you've got deployed. And so that, I mean, it's certainly something, the path that we're going down here at Idaho National Laboratory, because we have a big enough team to do these sorts of things. A lot of the challenges in the energy sector, a lot of it is, I'm not always convinced that the OT systems don't just sit on the IT network. And so now you have a sort of a second problem, if you will. And because a lot of these OT systems are quite old, if you will, you don't really protect the operational technology per se. What you have to protect is just the subnet that they live on, and prevent people from getting on the subnet, because that's the best you can do. A lot of these systems, industrial controls, they don't have MFA built into them per se. So you can put MFA on top into the subnet, but that's it. And so you're going to have to start to use AI, as Kynan was talking about, sort of a layer up, if you will, to protect the broader subnet. And that's probably the best you can do until people modernize their controls.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I did a show a couple weeks ago with folks from the DoD who were doing the same thing with like weapon systems and things that uh, aren't are kind of the same way, where they don't have really any computing power, and that's what they were doing. Rob, was they were adding those AI controls and that cybersecurity to the upper level subnet to get to them, and so that sounds like that's a valid thing that could happen within energy as well. So this has been a fascinating talk with both of you. I'm learning so much from our amazing speakers today. Unfortunately, we're just getting close to the back end of our time. We have just about 10 minutes left, but more than enough time to ask each of our guests one more question before we have to say goodbye today. So, Kynan, first off, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your amazing insights with us. We talked about the challenges and rewards of using AI at agencies and within the energy sector. For those in our audience today, maybe they enjoyed listening to some of the success stories and some of the examples that you and Rob shared, but they're concerned about the many challenges ahead to try to get there. Do you have any advice for them about maybe where they can get started? Sometimes, when you're looking at, was it like eating an elephant or whatever, it can look really, really big and impossible. Is there any way that you can maybe advise folks where they can get started to sort of get their feet in the water and start experiencing some of the advantages of AI within their agency?
Yep. Again, we kind of talked around it several times in this discussion, but it's first, what are you trying to accomplish with AI, right? What is the intended purpose? If you understand that, it's better stated. It's like climbing a mountain. First, you got to identify what's the mountain I'm going to climb. From there, you got to develop like, what is my strategy to climb? What is the gear that I need? All these have parallels to how you ask the question, right? Like, what am I trying to solve with AI? What I need to put into AI? What kind of biases do I expect? What kind of policies do I need to put in place? What technology should complement our existing infrastructure today, right? What is the cost savings? Is there a cost savings? Am I looking for a cost savings? To me, it's asking those fundamental questions first, right? Once you've asked these questions, and you're not going to get all the questions at once, right? It's going to be part of that journey. Again, climbing a mountain doesn't happen overnight. It's a whole long process. So it's asking that question, like, what am I trying to accomplish? And what do I expect? And then what do we think is the proper roadmap to go do that? And then just normal programmatic behavior, right? Normal PMP type work is like track that. Like, am I on point? Am I meeting my milestones? Is what the result I wanted out of the AI doing what I needed to do? I think that is always the beginning. From there, you can get into modernization as technology grows, as things become more federated, as these models become more integrated in our daily lives. I think the boundary between, asking, are we doing AI and doing AI is going to be blurred, because it's going to be part of the ecosystem in the future. And part of this is just embracing that is going to be a fact. However, I keep on harping on it. It's really just, what am I trying to, what is my expectations? And I do want to answer some of the questions really quickly. I think I don't foresee AI fully replacing anybody. I think in the cybersecurity world, AI is an augmentation to your existing workforce, right? It allows your analysts and your engineers to really substantially get at the real challenges of cybersecurity in particular. I think that is really where the future of AI and cyber intersects.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I'm glad you brought that point up. That was kind of an audience question from a little while back with AI replacing people, and I hope you're right about that. I mean, I kind of see the same thing, but I right now I think there's some people that are kind of want to use AI to replace people, but I think that in general, it's going to be much better as a tool working with people in the future.
Well, again, AI has hallucinations. AI has biases. You need a human in the loop to look at that, to make the decision, right? I don't think AI in this current iteration is going to replace people. Like, we humans are very creative, very capable. Like, we have more than AI in our brain, right? That's what we modeled it after. So, like, we're going to be part of that process. It's just fundamentally, it's going to change what we do in those work environments. Really, I see this AI as a way to, again, reduce the amount of time spent on analysis. allow AI to do kind of the mundane things, the things that take an exorbitant amount of time to do, and allow us to really address the real problems at hand in cybersecurity.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you so much, Kynan. It was a real pleasure to have you with us today. And Rob, also, it's always amazing to have you with us. For our final question today for you, I'd like to ask you about the future of this area, something I always like to do when we have experts like yourself who are kind of visionaries talking about a topic. What do you think the next steps in AI-assisted cybersecurity will be, and how can federal agencies tap into this technology and, as you said before, stay ahead of the curve of the increasingly challenging threat landscape and keep us ahead of the bad guys?
Yeah, so I think it's a multi-step process. I think this is a journey, not so much we just turn it on and it works, right? So first and foremost, agencies need to start to get comfortable with the technology and embrace it. And you can do that. You can start slow, right? We can take AI to aggregate and analyze the threat intelligence that we're getting from the various sources, and then use it to, number one, give us a comprehensive view of what our threat landscape is, and then potentially to predict what future attacks might look like, so that we can prepare. We can also use AI sort of for continuous monitoring or scanning for vulnerabilities and keep us informed on that. And once we have sort of some of those things done and we're starting to get comfortable, then we can get more aggressive. We can start to use it for advanced threat detection and response, as Kynan was talking about, to allow it to do the judge work, so that the analyst is now doing the hard part right at the beginning and not later on. We can use it for automated incident response, because there's a number of things that come in that are pretty cut and dry and may today require an analyst, but in the future you can automate it away, and so they don't even see it. It just isolates a node all by itself and just lets you know, so that you can go in and fix it. I guess that, and just to follow up one more thing, because I can't resist. But recall, those that are older as I am, in the 70s, when the advent of computing came out, and all these futurists were saying how much more leisure time that we were going to have because of the computer. And then think about what actually happened. I think Kynan is spot on with AI. I don't think it's going to replace people. I think it just changes the nature of people's work.
Makes sense. That's really funny. Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate that. Thank you both for talking with me today about this fascinating topic. I learned so much from you all, and I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you so much to our superstar speakers today, Rob and Kynan, for joining us today to talk about this critically important topic for our amazingly attentive audience. I appreciate the time that you guys spent talking with me and our audience today. And thank you so much to our amazing audience. I'm so glad that you are all here with us today. And thank you for your great questions. We tried to get to an awful lot of them today, so that was great. Glad that you're participating and enjoying the show as well. And please check out our schedule of future shows. We have a lot of really great content coming up right around the corner, and I hope to see you all there. So that's it for today. Let me turn things over now to Fed Insider's Claudia Hosky for some final thoughts for our amazing audience today.
Thanks, John. And thanks again to our speakers and to our awesome audience today for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to log back in the next day or two if you want to download a copy of today's captioning transcript. As John mentioned, we have many webinars in the works, so be sure to visit fedinsider.com so you can see what's coming up and register for multiple webinars at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is Fed Insider signing off.